All right, welcome back to another edition of We Rise Fighting Labor podcast. We bring you today's labor news, history, and analysis from the U.S. and around the world. This is a podcast you listen to with your fellow workers organizing on the shop floor. This is a podcast you listen to before walking into your union meeting. As always, I am Rick Urrutia here with my co-host Brian Pfeiffer. Now, today's episode is fully dedicated to covering some labor news. This week we cover news from Europe, Florida, the University of Michigan, Rutgers, sourdough workers, and much more. We haven't been able to record a new episode in a few weeks, so if you're a fan or if you're listening to this for the first time and you like what you're hearing, please like, subscribe, share, talk about, recommend, get our logo tattooed on your body, broadcast over the intercom at work, share with your fellow workers, all that sweet jazz. And as always, we really enjoy sharing music, art, and culture with everyone. Today's group is called Los Guaraguao. They're a well-known band from Venezuela whose songs are about social justice and are anti-imperialist in nature. The song we're going to play is called No Basta Rezar, which means don't stop at praying. And to give you an idea of the lyrics, for the benefit of those who don't speak Spanish, in one section, the singer says along the lines of, and you pray in good faith, and you pray from the heart, but so does the pilot when he boards the plane, to go carpet bomb the kids in Vietnam, to go carpet bomb the kids in Vietnam, because it was written in that time. So it's a call to action. It's not telling us to not pray. It's just saying we got to do more than that. This is Los Guaraguao with No Basta Rezar, and then we'll get into some labor news.
Hacen falta muchas cosas para conseguir la paz. No basta rezar. Hacen falta muchas cosas para conseguir la paz. Y rezan de buena fe, y rezan de corazón, pero también reza el piloto cuando monta en el avión. A bombardear a los niños del Vietnam, para ir a bombardear a los niños del Vietnam. No basta rezar, hacen falta muchas cosas para conseguir la paz.
All right, listeners, good evening. This is Brian from We Rise Fighting here with Brother Rick. We're happy to report today that the Starbucks Workers United, workers across the country, struck at 100 stores March 22nd. Thousands of Starbucks workers across the country held down picket lines at over 100 locations. Nationwide, Starbucks workers are experiencing severe hour cuts, inconsistent schedules, and a refusal to bargain by the bosses for the union stores. So the Starbucks Workers United on their page asks if Starbucks cares about workers like it states it does, the beating heart of their business, why wouldn't they want to meet with workers in good faith to establish a Starbucks? That's right. More mass actions are ongoing across the U.S. in the coming weeks. See the Starbucks Workers United Facebook page for updates and information. And Rick was on a picket line supporting the workers in Denver last week. How'd it go out there, Rick?
You know, it was really inspiring, man. It was mostly young workers in their early 20s holding it down. Spoke to a couple of them and, just got their take on it. They were really excited about joining a union. They carried the impression, at least with a couple of workers that I spoke to, that, before they joined and before they got everything started, they thought that unions were just for like auto workers, for like industrial workers and stuff like that. So they were really excited to learn that they could unionize at Starbucks. And for me, I had to reassure them because there were people crossing their picket line, nothing more important than a cup of coffee, never mind the picket line. So there were people crossing the picket line, and I noted that it was a lot of folks who were right around my age, in their 40s and later, who, that's why I really brought home the point to these young workers. This is why your thing is so inspiring, because you're breathing some fresh air into the labor movement. And, I'm not putting my faith in in people my age so much, although I still have faith. So it was really cool to see it. A lot of the customers did turn away and went to a local coffee shop in solidarity and actually, express their solidarity and support. So it was good to be there. It was good to be there all around. I definitely walked away really, really inspired by these young workers, man. I think, yeah, my hope is in them. I'm inspired by them. So thank you to the Starbucks workers who were on strike here a couple of weeks ago. And hopefully I will be able to get a couple of them on the show sometime soon. So on to my part over here. Today I'm going to talk about SEIU real quick because, part of the process in getting ready for this podcast is going through some press releases, going through the press releases of some of the unions that we cover. And in today's instance, I started researching SEIU and going through their press releases. And, I went to their media center on the international body's website, and they had a total of 1,004, literally 1,004 press releases on there since 2015. And what caught my attention was that of these 1,004 press releases, and here is where I actually went down this rabbit hole, of those 1,004 press releases, the president of SEIU, Mary Kay Henry, is mentioned in the headline of 452 of those press releases. All right. Now that's literally 45% of all the press releases being put out by SEIU International. Now, what is that exactly? Brian, you and I were talking about this before we jumped on this show, and you promised me that you would make sense of this. So what is that exactly? Mary Kay Henry, she's making $289,000 a year. And when she took over SEIU in 2010, the union had 1.9 million members. Now the union currently has 1.8 million members. So during her 13-year tenure, SEIU has lost 100,000 members, but Mary Kay's salary actually rose from $254,000 a year in 2010 to now, which is $289,000. So that's a $35,000 difference for a union president whose union has lost 100,000 members. I put this out there for a few reasons. Because number one, we're always encouraging people, to get it from the horse's mouth. So I encourage people to always go, to the union's website, see their press releases, take it directly from them. And to hear that a union president who's making almost $300,000 a year is in the headline of 452 press releases, that just doesn't sit well with me, because this is a person who is representing janitors, security guards, people in the service industry, people in the food industry, and she's making almost $300,000 a year. How is this possible? When we say that we bring you labor news and analysis, this is the analysis piece that we're talking about. We have to think critically about this, because what exactly is this? How does Mary Kay Henry have the power, making almost $300,000 a year, to represent immigrant janitors who are barely getting by? How is she the voice of this? So it brings to light all these questions, brings to surface these contradictions, and hopefully some of these contradictions, once we tease them out, we find a path to social justice. We find a path to union democracy. So putting this out there for this reason, that's my first portion of quote unquote news today. Really, it's more so of an analysis. Brian, you are up next with some news from Michigan as far as developments within the United Auto Workers and right to work. What's going on in Michigan, Brian?
Thanks, Rick, for those points. And there's a bubbling up of these types of questions across the country. What kind of union do we want if we're engaged in unions, building unions? And part of that struggle includes, we have had discussions with fighting members of the United Electric Workers on the podcast here. And they do have a clause in their constitution that goes back to the founding of their union, that no staff person can make more than the highest paid member in the union. And these types of discussions are taking place across the country now. And it segues into our next news item, the United Auto Workers.
Sorry, Brian. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but really, thank you for bringing that up. Why is any union president making more than any member of their union? Because here, put yourself in this situation. What happens when Mary Kay Henry goes to negotiate with management and she's making more than management at times, or any union president is making more than the management of a company? Like, how are they going to fight for the workers' best interest? That's not going to happen. At best, they're going to treat their membership, they're going to treat the workers as a commodity, and they're going to negotiate the terms of their exploitation. That's not what we're looking for here. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for bringing up the United Electrical Workers. But as you were saying, you were about to go into Michigan, and sorry, but that is a hot topic.
Yeah. So these are fundamental questions and discussions that are coming up all across the country, and one of them, actually, just the United All Workers for Democracy, UAWD, with these types of questions arising and discussions across the UAW over the past months here, there is a new slate from the United All Workers for Democracy. 6 members of the UAW have now taken up half and won their elections for half of the executive board at the UAW. Brandon Mancillo, Mike Booth, Margaret Mock, Rich Boyer, LaShawn English, and Daniel Vincente have all won seats on the board. And on top of that, Sean Fain is now the new president of the United Auto Workers. These are historic developments. We shall see how things play out. But these types of questions that you just raised, Rick, what are rank and file member democracy in a union? What does that mean? How much are leaders and staff to be paid? Member-run unions, and all the questions that arise out of that. So this is a big part of this struggle to win these 6 board seats and the presidency of the UAW. And now it'll take the rank and file to ensure that they will run the union where they see fit to run their union, the UAW. On top of that, in Michigan, of course, the UAW is a nationwide union, but it is Solidarity House, is based in Detroit. In Michigan, there's been various developments, including right to work, which was, I believe, in 2013, was rammed through the right-wing legislature and signed by the right-wing governor at the time, has been repealed and by both houses of the legislature and signed by the governor in Michigan. Now, it's important to note that some people would say that this is just the Democratic Party being nice to workers, but we should remember that we did raise Sean O'Brien, the president of the Teamsters, on the We Rise Fighting a few weeks ago, and it's because of and other militant labor unions and this upsurge in the UAW, Starbucks Workers United, and many other developments that are happening in Michigan and across the country, but especially in Michigan, that pushed for this to happen. Right to work for less is repealed. It's the first time that this has happened in 58 years in this country. We talked about this previously as well. This arose because of Taft-Hartley, but it is a major victory for the working class. It's a huge development, and we send solidarity to our fellow workers there in Michigan for making this happen. It's not over with. There's a lot of laws on the books, racist anti-worker laws like the emergency financial manager law and others, and all the other austerity that's been pushed that also needs to be repealed, and that's being worked on as we speak by a variety of unions and community organizations in Michigan. Before Rick gets to the strike for GEO-AFT in Michigan, we just wanted to also mention our friends at Goddard College in Vermont. UAW Local 2322 are on strike. We did interview the president and vice president of Vermont AFL-CIO, and we want to make sure that we continue to follow up with our brothers and sisters on this podcast. We're not just reporting, we're also supporting struggles that are happening. So we send all solidarity to UAW Local 2322 members on strike in Vermont, and you can go to their Facebook page. They do need help for their strike fund and other kinds of support in spreading the word. So that'd be greatly appreciated. And again, Rick, academic workers across the country are on the move. We talked about that in our last podcast, and we're seeing it again in Michigan. Another strike. Tell us about it.
Yeah, another set of workers that are just really doing inspiring stuff is graduate student workers. As already mentioned, graduate workers at the University of Michigan are on strike, and this article is coming from bridgemichigan.com. State tells us that the University of Michigan is asking the Washtenaw County Circuit Court to order graduate student workers back to work after union members began a strike this week. Members of the Graduate Employees Organization, GEO, began a strike on Wednesday. On that same day, the university filed an unfair labor practices charge with the state and urged the state to order the union to stop the strike. Then on Thursday, the university filed a lawsuit against the union, requesting a temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction that would order student workers back to work. The university alleges that striking breaks the rules of the labor contract with the union, violates Michigan law, and irreparably harms the students, their families, the university, and the public. The two groups have been bargaining since November 2022, but have strong disagreements on several issues, including pay, childcare, and healthcare benefits. The union is seeking a 60% pay raise in year one of its new contract, which would increase pay for graduate students who teach in the fall and spring from about $24,000 a year to about $38,000 a year. This is Ann Arbor, mind you. This is one of the most expensive places to live in the country. The university is proposing an 11.5% increase over 3 years, with a 5% raise in the first year, a 3.5% increase the following year, and 3% increase the year after. There are about 2,200 graduate student instructors and graduate student staff assistants who teach or co-teach a class at the university. The university said in court filings. The union has 1,300 members. Now, if you go to their website, which is GEO 3550.org, that's the letters GEO followed by the numbers 3550.org. If you go to their website, they have all types of information as to what their demands are, how much it amounts to, just clarifying the position from the workers' point of view. And you could also donate to their strike fund from that website. So we encourage all to check out their website. It's very handy, very informative. So solidarity to striking GEO workers in Ann Arbor. You are an inspiration to us. Brian, you are up next with World Federation of Trade Unions and cuts to Medicaid. What's going on with all that, Brian?
All right, Rick. Graduate students, of course, are international. They're from all over the world, and they're bringing that spirit of resistance from across the world to Michigan, as well as the French workers, as we reported on, and many other workers in Germany and across the world are engaging in a variety of strikes. Today, we've specifically focused on a statement from the World Federation of Trade Unions solidarity statement with the strike in France. And part of this battle is the move by the right wing there to push austerity upon the workers from raising the retirement age 2 years. But it's also a variety of other austerity that has been attempted to be pushed on the workers in France. So the workers there have struck, shut down all kinds of different transport and a variety of other activities there in direct action with the strike. And the World Federation of Trade Unions put out a statement about this on March 22nd. And we would like to read that here. It says, quote, "The World Federation of Trade Unions expresses its undivided solidarity with the workers and trade unions of France that continue and culminate the relentless struggle against the pension austerity with the new nationwide strike." And it started on March 23rd, 2023. We congratulate the WFTU affiliates in France and the militant class-oriented trade unions who are at the forefront of this huge and massive struggle for the withdrawal of the anti-people and anti-labor pension reform of the French government. This is a crucial fight not only for the working class in France, it is a fight for all workers and pensioners. It is a universal fight against the anti-people policies of the bourgeois governments that promote increasing of the retirement age. It is a fight against the interest of big capital and multinationals aiming at the abolition of Social Security and the privatization of the pension system. It is a fight against the neoliberal analysis that links life expectancy with the retirement age, shamelessly alluding that the purpose of life is just to work until death. It is a struggle against the autocratic perception and oppressing practices that violate even the most fundamental democratic and trade union freedoms, banning and oppressing any popular struggle and resistance. The WFTU once again calls upon its affiliates and friends, the militant and class-oriented trade unions all over the globe, to express their practical support and organize activities before the French embassies or elsewhere, declaring their unconditional solidarity with the just demands of French workers, end quote. And that was a statement by the Secretariat of the World Federation of Trade Unions. And Rick, why we added the struggle here in this country, the austerity is brutal. We just saw the collapse of more banks, the bank bailouts, and in some of the most cruel and inhumane features of capitalism. Under the pandemic, there was federal legislation passed that alleviated some of the worst atrocities upon workers here, but much of that was temporary. And many of these temporary provisions could be extended by the states, but many states are now going to start cutting off these pandemic era assistance this week and up until May and also in June. And this is some of the most horrific, callous, cruel, outrageous policies that are taking place. And we're raising this because the WFTU is getting to the point that this is now under Western capitalism, that this is part of the feature of late stage capitalism in the world today. That we have capitalists that are saying, we need capitalism with the gloves off, get rid of social safety nets, get rid of regulations, work until you die and make profits for the ruling class. And like the WFTU, we say no to that. And there can be a response, and there needs to be for this. And we raised this on the last show with the French workers on the move, shutting down the country. And we call upon the National AFL-CIO and other unions to take up these issues and intervene in these struggles. There are millions and tens of millions of workers that could be organized to stop these cuts from happening, to stop these bank bailouts, uniting them with the Starbucks workers and all the struggles we're talking about on the show today. This could be a mighty spring offensive. And the Teamsters are talking about potentially going out on strike against UPS in the next days, weeks, and months. We could extremely elevate the class struggle against the enemy on Wall Street, and of course put out the demands that why is there $900 billion going to the Pentagon and the Pentagon budget and over $100 billion to Ukraine when people here are literally going to have their pandemic era benefits cut, and children can't even have $3 lunches are going to be cut. I mean, people should be like in the streets, like shutting highways down and massive general strikes. You're talking about 3, 4, 5-year-old kids and pre-K and kindergarten and young children and teenagers having their lunch taken away while there's billions for war and billions for bank bailouts. This is absolutely outrageous. So this is why we're raising with our friends. Like the capitalist, we need to do the opposite. This needs to be an uprising from the working class and oppressed peoples in Western capitalist nations to go against and go on the offensive. As we're seeing with these union struggles, a lot of folks want to fight. Just take some organization, we'll keep it moving. So we send solidarity to our friends in France and Germany, of course, we'll talk about a little later. And they shut down the country as well last week against some of this austerity. And so, Rick, we're really excited about these actions in other countries, and we need to bring it here home and escalate the class struggle. So now I'm going to talk, we're going to go back to one of the major things that are happening in this country, as we mentioned before. Another struggle at Rutgers and academic workers on the move from one end of the country to the other. And Rick's going to give us an update on the Rutgers union struggle.
Excited to read this news. This is coming from New Jersey SpotlightNews.org. The headline reads, Rutgers union members disrupt meeting, strike threat remains. Okay, now members of Rutgers University unions angry over stalled contract talks burst through a door Wednesday and disrupted a meeting where Michael Gower, the university's chief financial officer, was to discuss the university's budget. The protest quickly shut that down. University officials exited, leaving frustrated union members no closer to a resolution. Earlier this month, or last month, I should say, March, 3 unions representing some 9,000 educators and medical workers voted overwhelmingly to authorize a strike after negotiations dragged on for months. Amy Hyder, an adjunct professor, voted for the strike authorization. She is quoted as saying, quote, "We teach the same courses as full-time non-tenure track faculty. We get paid less than half of what they get paid. So we're asking for equal pay for equal work," unquote. And there is another quote, "All we hear is that there is no money, and we firmly disagree That's from Christine O'Connell, who heads the administrators union. They are public employees, and if the unions do strike, Rutgers president Jonathan Holloway has indicated he could ask for an injunction ordering the workers back on the job. But an open letter from more than 75 self-described, quote, labor, social justice, and Black freedom struggle scholars, unquote, across the U.S. asked Holloway to avoid a legal battle and, quote, work with the campus unions towards a just and fair contract, unquote. Another article in the Gothamist states that the academic work stoppage would virtually shut down New Jersey's flagship public university across all its campuses, including New Brunswick, Newark, and Camden, including affecting more than 67,000 students. Now, take a second to listen to that, and let's crunch those numbers here for a second, because really listen to that. 67,000 students. Now, I had mentioned previously that these are about 9,000 workers going on strike. So as we've done here in this podcast before, and as we will continue to do, we are going to highlight numbers like that because the capitalist media always comes out with numbers like that. They always crunch the numbers as how the strike will affect the economy, how the strike will affect the company, how the strike will affect profits, how the strike will affect the community, stuff like that. And they make you doubt yourself. You know, they force us to think of striking workers as an inconvenience to the rest of us. But really, when we take those numbers and we crunch them and we listen to that, 9,000 graduate workers affecting 67,000 students, that's power. That's power. That's not an inconvenience. That's power. And as long as this podcast exists, we're going to keep highlighting that article after article, strike after strike, struggle after struggle. So hats off to Rutgers, graduate workers. Thank you for bringing that inspiration and keeping Rutgers on the map like that. This would be the first strike of its nature at Rutgers, and we will continue to keep you informed as to what's going on with that. All right, next on the agenda, we have Brian. We're talking about sourdough workers. What's going on there, Brian?
All right, Rick, in Madison, Wisconsin, the South Central Federation of Labor, which is a federation there in Madison, is supporting the sourdough workers who are attempting to organize with the United Food and Commercial Workers, UFCW. They're asking to have supporters come on Monday, April 3rd, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Madison Sourdough, 916 Williamson Street in Madison, Wisconsin. Supporters are asked to buy a pastry or drink, wear a UFCW blue or other union clothes, leave the workers a handwritten note in solidarity, and show the unionizing workers that they're not alone. So once again, that's Monday, April 3rd, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Come support the sourdough workers who are organizing a union, 916 Williamson Street in Madison. And more information can be found at the South Central Federation of Labor Facebook page in Madison, Wisconsin. So we wish them well. And Rick, we're going to go to the West Coast, to the Bay Area.
Yeah, the Bay Area. So this is coming from abcnews.com. And the headline reads, Bay Area Police Union leader allegedly smuggled fentanyl into U.S. to sell in bulk. Let me reread that in case you didn't hear that correctly. Bay Area Police Union leader allegedly smuggled fentanyl into U.S. to sell in bulk. And here we go. The head of the police union in the San Francisco Bay Area faces federal charges for allegedly smuggling thousands of synthetic opioids into the U.S. from multiple countries with the intent to distribute them. San Jose Police Officers Association Executive Director Joanne Marianne Segovia, 64, has been charged with attempt to unlawfully import a controlled substance, specifically Valeryl fentanyl, a fentanyl analog, according to a complaint filed in federal court earlier this year. Between 2015 and 2023, that's 8 years, Segovia received 61 shipments that were labeled, get this, wedding party favors, shirts tops, gift makeup, chocolate and sweets, food supplement, health product, and supplement, originating from countries including Hong Kong, Hungary, India, and Singapore, according to the complaint. In reality, they were illicit drugs, prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of California allege. In an interview earlier this month, Segovia allegedly told investigators, quote, that she had nothing to do with the orders sent to her, unquote, and blamed them on the woman she identified as a, quote, family friend and housekeeper, unquote, according to the complaint. If convicted, Segovia faces up to 20 years in prison. The union said it had no knowledge of the alleged criminal activity and is conducting an internal investigation. Segovia, a civilian employee, has been placed on leave, the union said. Now, here, just to put out some thoughts as to what the police union is to us, anytime you hear of any case where, you know, a brother gets shot for some reason, brother gets beaten for some reason by the police, you know, the first people to step up and defend them in the courts legally is the police union. While the police officer is out on administrative leave or paid leave, the police officers union comes and defends them. Now, usually the result of that is that whatever barbaric act, be it a beating or a killing that was carried out, is somehow legalized or justified by the police officers union. Now, when this happens case after case, beating after beating, killing after killing, year after year, generation after generation, what this is creating a ratchet effect and legalizing, in other words, legitimizing all these barbaric acts that are carried out by the police against the communities of color, against brown people, against immigrants, against the most oppressed. So that is our take here on the police officers union. You know, we do support any union, but not this one, man. And that's because of their role and how it relates to the working class. We in this podcast are interested in the liberation of the working class, and the police, along with the police officers union, is a counter to this. So, you know, I have no sympathy. I'm speaking here for myself. I have no sympathy for the people involved in this fentanyl trade. I hope they get prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. This to me is, quite frankly, a disgusting act. And beyond that, words fail me, man. But just need to put all union news out there for our listeners. So up next, Brian, you have some news for us from the Florida Teachers Union, along with news from Germany and Wisconsin. What's going on over there, Brian?
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, with your previous post too, I'd just like to mention that when you mentioned facing 20 years, California is the prison industrial complex capital of the world. And there are fellow workers that get busted, and many of them framed by the police for a very little amount of drugs. And by the way, those drugs have to be tested by the police. So a lot of times they're not even drugs, a lot of framing going on. There's a lot of dubious activity that takes place. But compared to what this police official has done to face 20 years, when we have our brothers and sisters on death row and doing life and in jail and prison for decades in California and across the country, is beyond outrageous and goes, I just wanted to back you up, Rick, on the nature of capitalism and the role the police play in this society. And we've talked about that before. We see this in strike. You'll quickly learn which side the police are on when you have a strike. Among the other issues that you raised, that it's not a question of a nice person. It's a question of what is their role in class society. And their role is to oppress us and exploit us on behalf of the bosses and to keep the rich rich and us poor. So thanks so much for raising that, Rick, and solidarity with our brothers and sisters behind the walls. On this show, we support prisoners and their workers as well, extremely super exploited. And we send solidarity to them behind the walls. So yeah, in Florida, Rick, we got very serious situations happening. The governor is essentially a fascist character. There's a lot to report. We don't have time tonight to go over a lot of it. We would definitely suggest to go to the Florida AFL-CIO page, as well as the faculty union there in Florida, which represents 25,000 workers in the University of Florida system. There are many things happening. It's essentially in Wisconsin in 2011 that Florida is even going more to the right on some of the anti-union and Jim Crow, bigoted, racist attacks against curriculum and Black studies, and also women, of course, there. So it's a full-scale, full-court press against the workers and oppressed people in Florida. There is resistance. Defender Youth Defender Organization, immigrant rights groups, other student and worker organizations are resisting on a whole variety of levels. April 26th to the 28th, the Poor People's Campaign is going to have a march to the state capitol, and there's a variety of other activities taking place. We were in contact with some union leaders there in the past week, and it looks to be that the supermajority right wing in the state capitol is going to try to ram through a whole variety of horrendous anti-union laws similar to Wisconsin, maybe even worse, through the legislature in the next week, and potentially signed by the governor, of course. So we encourage folks there in Florida. The only thing that's really going to stop this, parliamentary methods are important to testify and be on record. But at this kind of a scale with these types of fascist and anti-worker moves, what's going to stop this is worker direct action and strikes and shutdowns. We'll see if it gets to that point. But we know it's a very heavy situation in Florida, and there's a lot of courage and bravery from fellow workers there, and we send them our solidarity, and we encourage listeners to check out the Facebook pages of the Immokalee workers there, the Florida AFL-CIO, the AFT and the NEA pages there. There's a lot of activity taking place. Also, like Germany, like France, there's a variety of different things happening in Germany. There was a work stoppage there, a strike, rail strike, transportation strike there in Germany to oppose the austerity, which is similar to France. And we wanted to raise that as well for listeners to check that out and do some research on that. In closing, we have mentioned, of course, we always like to raise Wisconsin, not just because I'm from there, but because it really is ground zero in the country, from school choice or school vouchers in the late 90s to so-called welfare reform in the 1990s to this last 10 to 20 years. Wisconsin has really been a laboratory for, as we mentioned before, a capitalism with the gloves off, austerity, Jim Crow type capitalism. And this week, the Wisconsin Supreme Court election is taking place. The voting will take place on April 4th, and there's an all-out move by many to vote on April 4th. And from here at We Rise Fighting, we discuss this a lot, but our position is that voting, yes, is a human right, and we defend the right to vote, but the masses, in particular the workers with oppressed people, make history. So we would just like to go into depth a little bit about this, because this is a very important topic and a very important lessons for the working class, just like we talked about the role of the police. Without the understanding of the role of the police and the way that courts operate in capitalism, it's hard to make advances, and it's easy to be bamboozled and hoodwinked, like Malcolm X said many times. So on April 4th, 2023, that'll be this Tuesday, voters in Wisconsin will go to the polls to elect a new Supreme Court justice. The race between a liberal and a right-wing tool of the rich has brought in the most amount of money for these two candidates in a state Supreme Court race in U.S. history. This is U.S. history. The most amount of money ever in U.S. history for this race. Since 2011 in particular, Wisconsin has been the site of some of the most extreme Jim Crow, gerrymandered, bigoted, anti-union, anti-women, racist, anti-environment austerity in the United States. Much of what's been done in Wisconsin has been modeled across the country, such as in Florida today, from school choice and vouchers, privatization methods to the evisceration of safety nets, and a full-scale attack on unions, curriculum that represents historically oppressed peoples and workers. And we might add, what has staved off even worse in Wisconsin has been groups like immigrant rights groups like Voces de la Frontera, the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association, unions, Black and brown organizations, and women with allies in the white workers have staved off even worse attacks than this through unions and organization. Both the Democratic and Republican Party in Wisconsin have funneled tens of millions into the Supreme Court race. Tens of millions. into a Supreme Court race, as have many unions and community organizations. For example, multi-billionaire George Soros, quote unquote, donated $1 million February 22nd to the state Democratic Party in Wisconsin, and the Illinois governor, J.B. Pritzker, gave $1 million on March 14th. Senator Elizabeth Warren also gave $500,000, $500,000 to the state Democratic Party in Wisconsin. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's campaign committee also gave $12,000 to the state Democratic Party on March 13th. The billionaire Yulian family has given millions to the Wisconsin State Republican Party, as have many other Wall Street vultures. So we've seen how both the capitalist parties, the Democratic and Republican Party, have received millions from a variety of different forces. Although the liberal candidate in this race claims to be pro-worker and pro-women, history shows that it will be the masses that will ultimately bring a better world into birth for poor and working people. The outcome of this race is important in this period for a host of working class issues, but it won't be the deciding factor in the class struggle and the fight against racism and bigotry. Workers, in alliance with the oppressed peoples, will be the deciding factor through independent internationalist organizing in our names and our interests. And Rick, I'd like to close this with your thoughts on this, that it's easy to think that one Supreme Court justice, no matter how progressive they are, even revolutionary, which they're not in this case, it's a typical liberal, or we elect this politician or that politician, that somehow, some way, that'll overturn class relations in our favor. When we know in public sector worker organizing, everything that we had in Wisconsin that was eviscerated in 2011 came about by a virtual rebellion of our class in 1,000 different directions in the 1960s and 70s. From the 1970 postal workers' wildcat strike to wildcat strikes of teachers, municipal workers. This is what won collective bargaining in Wisconsin, not a Supreme Court justice. Roe versus Wade was passed in 1973. There was millions of women and their allies on the street. The anti-Vietnam War movement. There was hundreds of millions of workers in motion with their families in the United States, North America, Canada, Mexico, people coming into the United States to support these struggles from all over the world. In 1970, 2/3 of the world was socialist. The USSR was in existence then. And Cuba, of course, lent a lot of assistance and resistance. And here domestically in the country, what we won in states like Wisconsin was a result of direct class struggle in the interest of workers and direct actions of all different kinds. So again, we support the right to vote, of course. And this liberal candidate is, of course, better than the right-wing candidate. And we support the right to vote and oppose any kind of attacks on voting. But we understand here at We Rise Fighting that the ultimate struggle is going to be in the streets and in the workplaces and with the workers and the oppressed people, and fighting back on an internationalist basis and not supporting wars and demanding what we need for us and our families and our loved ones. But I just want to see what you thought on this, Rick. You have any thoughts on this?
No, that's it, man. You know, that's a great summary. That's why we do what we do on this podcast, to highlight the power of the masses, you know, to highlight what is going on in Germany, in France, Great Britain, you know, because they're throwing down right now, and we need to know this stuff. We need to know this stuff so we can connect our struggles, so we can be inspired, so we can see that, yes, it can be done. You know, this isn't some abstract theoretical stuff that we're talking about. You know, this stuff is happening, and it can happen here. It has happened here, as Brian just mentioned. You know, there's been all types of struggles, labor struggles in the US that have really shooken up the system here. Everything from railway struggles to postal struggles to the Amazon struggle now, the Starbucks struggle. All this stuff is inspiring. We need to take note. We are here as a podcast to document working class history and where the working class gets its power from. Because as you already said, Brian, yes, we do support people's right to vote. Absolutely. But where is the real power for workers under capitalism, under class society? It's in them uniting, it's in us fighting, it's in us boycotting, it's in direct action, it's in internationalism, it's in union democracy. That's where our power is. So thank you for highlighting that. Thank you. And thank you for everyone for listening again. We took a few weeks off just because, you know, we also are workers and we have lives, and things to attend to in our lives, but it's really good to be back. And as I said in the beginning of the podcast, if you like this podcast, please subscribe. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple, we're on Google, whatever media you choose, we're there and you can subscribe. That way you don't miss an episode. We love doing this, in part because we love documenting labor history, in part because we talk about this stuff anyway. That's how this podcast started, is, Brian and I and Jerry and I at the time, we just talk about this stuff anyway. So we decided to turn it into a podcast. So if you will, please subscribe, please like, please share, and continue to tune in. So thank you, everyone. Solidarity to all. Thank you for listening in. Have a good night, everyone.